Hello students, welcome to EPG Pathshala. I'm Dr. Manjeet Singh from Punjabi University Patiala. Today we are going to discuss about a module on the topic corporate governance under the paper business environment. After reading this module, you should be in a position to comprehend the manner in which the corporations are directed and controlled throughout the world. You should also be in a position to understand the basic principles, theories, and models of corporate governance across the world. Corporate governance may be referred to as a system by which companies are directed and controlled, and it has become a key topic in today's globalized world. Corporate governance refers to the mechanisms and the processes by which corporations are directed and controlled. Corporate governance includes the rules and regulations that focus towards the allocation of rights and responsibilities among different participants in the corporation, such as board of directors, managers, shareholders, creditors, auditors, regulators, and other stakeholders. It is a framework that forms the basis for decision making in the corporations. It acts as a torchlight in identifying the objectives of the corporation and pursuing them, keeping into account the market, regulatory, and social environment. The principal aim of corporate governance is to align the interests of different stakeholders in the corporation for the overall benefit of all the stakeholders. During the past 2 decades, the world has witnessed an awful end to some of the leading corporations in the world, like Enron, WorldCom, Tyco, etc. The major reason for such debacles was managerial greed, unethical practices, and lack of suitable governance mechanism. The last decade, therefore, has witnessed a continuous attempt to strengthen the corporate governance norms all over the world, including India. This has greatly been influenced by the emergence of Sarbanes-Oxley Act in the USA and the Cadbury Committee in the United Kingdom. Definitions of corporate governance. Schliffer and Vishney defined corporate governance as the ways in which the suppliers of finance to corporations assures themselves of getting a return on their investment. Corporate governance involves a set of relationships between a company's management, its board, its shareholders, and other stakeholders. Corporate governance also provides the structure through which the objective of the company are set and the means of attaining those objectives and monitoring performance are determined. F. Meyer opines that corporate governance is concerned with ways of bringing the interests of investors and managers into line and ensuring that firms are run for the benefit of investors. Narrow versus broad perceptions of corporate governance. There exists a vast amount of literature on corporate governance that gives numerable definitions about the subject. To get a true and fair view on the subject, it would be prudent to give narrow as well as a broad definition of corporate governance. In the narrow sense, corporate governance is defined as the relationship of a company to its shareholders. It involves a set of relationships amongst the company's management, its board of directors, its shareholders, its auditors, and other stakeholders. These relationships provide the guidelines through which the objectives of the company are set, the path of attaining these objectives is charted out, and the ways of monitoring performance is determined. So, the key aspects of good corporate governance includes transparency of corporate structures and operations, the accountability of managers and the boards to shareholders, and the corporate responsibility towards stakeholders. While the corporate governance, in narrow sense, has laid down the emphasis for creating long-term trust between the companies and the external providers of capital, it would be wrong to think that the importance of corporate governance lies solely in the better access of finance. Managers around the world have realized that better corporate governance adds considerable value to their operational performance as well. It improves the strategic thinking at the top by including independent by inducting independent directors who bring a wealth of experience and a host of new ideas. It rationalizes the management and monitoring of risk that a firm faces globally. It limits the liability of top management and the directors by carefully articulating the decision making process. It assures the integrity of the financial reports. It has long term reputational effects among the key stakeholders both internally and externally. However, in a broader sense, corporate governance is not about maintaining long term relations with the suppliers of finance only. In fact, it calls for a common path that would lead to attainment of common objectives of all the stakeholders in the corporation and not just the shareholders. Good corporate governance is important for overall market confidence, the efficiency of capital allocation, the growth and development of countries' industrial bases, and ultimately the nation's overall wealth and welfare. It is important to note that in both the narrow as well as in the broad definition, the concept of disclosure and transparency occupy the center stage. In the first instance, they create trust at the firm level among the suppliers of finance. In the second instance, they create overall confidence at the aggregate economy level. In both cases, they result in efficient allocation of capital. Theories of capital governance. Agency theory. Agency theory was established by Elchin and Damts in 1972 and further developed by Jensen and Mackling in 1976. It is defined as a relationship between the principals, such as shareholders, and agents, such as company executives and managers. According to this theory, shareholders, who are the owners or the principals, appoints the managers or the agents to manage the business on their behalf. There are two factors that can influence the prominence of agency theory. First, the theory is conceptually and the theory is conceptually very simple theory that reduces the corporation into two participants of managers and shareholders. Second, agency theory suggests that employees or managers in organizations can be self-interested. The agency theory, shareholders expect the agents to act and make decisions in the principal's interest. On the contrary, the agent may not necessarily make decisions in the best interest of the principals. The agent may be succumb to self-interest, opportunistic behavior, and falling short of the congruence between the aspirations of the principal and the agent's pursuits. As we can see from the figure, the principal, for example, the shareholders, they employ the agents, that is the directors. And directors are expected to perform, and their task is to manage the company. So, the directors act on the behalf of the shareholders and they are accountable to the shareholders. But ultimately, the managing of the company is done on the behalf of the shareholders. Stewardship theory. In contrast to agency theory, stewardship theory presents a different model of management where managers are considered good stewards who will act in the best interests of the owners. The fundamentals of stewardship theory are based on social psychology, which focuses on behavior of executives. The stewardship behavior is pro-organizational and collectivist and has higher utility than individualistic self-serving behavior. And the steward's behavior will not depart from the interests of the organization because the steward seeks to attain the objectives of the organization. According to Smolem, where shareholders' wealth is maximized, the steward's utility are maximized too, because the organizational success will serve most requirements and stewards will have a clear vision. He also states that the stewards balance tensions between the different beneficiaries and other interest groups. Therefore, the stewardship theory is an argument put forward in firm performance that satisfies the requirements of the interested parties, resulting in dynamic performance equilibrium for balanced governance. In this perspective, stewards are companies' executives and managers working for the shareholders, protect and make profits for the shareholders. The stewardship perspective suggests that the stewards are satisfied and motivated when the organizational success is attained. Stakeholders theory. The stakeholders theory was embedded in the management discipline in 1970 and gradually developed by Freeman in 1984, incorporating corporate accountability to a broad range of stakeholders. Wheeler et al. Argued that stakeholder theory derived from combination of sociological and organizational disciplines. Indeed, stakeholders theory is less of a formal unified theory and more of a broad research tradition, incorporating philosophy, ethics, political theory, economies, law, and organizational science. Stakeholders can be defined as any group or individual who can affect or is affected by the achievement of the organization's objectives. Unlike agency theory, in which the managers are working and serving for the shareholders, stakeholders theorists suggest that managers in organization have a network of relationships to serve. This includes the suppliers, the employees, and the business partners. And it is argued that this group of network is important other than the owner-manager-employee relationship as in agency theory. Now let's talk about another theory of corporate governance which is called resource dependency theory. While the stakeholders theory focuses on the relationships with many groups for individual benefits, resource dependency theory concentrates on the role of board of directors in providing access to the resources which are needed by the firm. This theory focuses on the role that the directors play in providing or securing the essential resources to an organization through their linkages to the external environment. According to Hillman, Canella, and Petzold, directors bring resources to the firm, such as information, skills, access to the key constituents, such as suppliers, buyers, public policy makers, social groups, as well as it brings the legitimacy to the system. Directors can be classified into four categories as insiders, business experts, support specialists, and community of influentials. First, the insiders are the current and former executives of the firm, and they provide expertise in the specific areas such as finance, law, on the firm itself, as well as the general strategy and direction. Second is the business experts who are current, former senior executives, and directors of other large for profit firms, and they provide expertise on business strategy, decision making, and problem solving. Third, the sports specialists, which are in the form of lawyers, bankers, insurance company representatives, and public relation experts, and these specialists provide support in their individual specialized fields. Finally, the community influentials are the political leaders, the university faculty members, the members of the clergy, the leaders of social or community organizations. Political theory. Political theory brings the approach of developing voting support from shareholders rather than by purchasing voting power. Hence, having a political influence in the corporate governance may direct corporate governance within the organization. Public interest is much reserved as the government participates in the corporate decision making, taking into consideration the cultural challenges. The political model highlights the allocation of corporate power, profits, and privileges that are determined by the government favors. The political model of corporate governance can have an immense influence on the governance development. Over the last decades, the government of a country has been seen to have a strong political influence on the firms. As a result, there is an entrance of politics into the governance structure of firms' mechanisms. Principles of corporate governance. The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development published its Principles of Governance in 2004. These are rights of shareholders. Corporate governance framework should protect the shareholders and facilitate their rights in the company. Companies should generate investment returns for the risk capital put up by the shareholders. Equitable treatment of shareholders. All shareholders should be treated equitably, fairly, including those who constitute a minority, individuals, and foreign shareholders. Shareholders should have redressed when their rights are contravened or where an individual shareholder or group of shareholders is oppressed by majority. Stakeholders. The corporate governance framework should recognize the legal rights of the stakeholders and facilitate the cooperation with them in order to create wealth, employment, and sustainable enterprises. Disclosure and transparency. Companies should make relevant, timely disclosures on the matters affecting financial performance, management, and ownership of the business. Board of Directors. The Board of Directors should set the direction of a company and monitor management in the order that the company will achieve its objectives. The corporate governance framework should underpin the board's accountability to the company and its members. Now, let us talk about the different models of corporate governance. The first is Anglo American model. The Anglo US model is characterized by share ownership of individual and increasingly institutional investors not affiliated with the corporation, primarily known as outside shareholders or outsiders. A well developed legal framework defining the rights and responsibilities of the three key players, namely management, directors, and shareholders. And this model is comparatively uncomplicated procedure for interaction between shareholders, and the corporation, as well as among shareholders during or outside the annual general meetings. Equity financing is a common method of raising capital for corporations in United Kingdom and US. The Anglo-American model, in this model, there is a causal relationship between the importance of equity financing, the size of capital market, and the development of corporate governance system. The US is both the world's largest capital market and home for the world's most developed system of proxy voting and shareholder activism by institutional investors. Institutional investors also play an important role both in the capital market and corporate governance in UK. The next type of model is the Japanese model. The Japanese model is characterized by high level of stock ownership by affiliated banks and companies, a banking system characterized by strong long-term links between bank and the corporation, a legal, public policy, and industrial policy framework designed to support and promote keiretsu, which primarily means industrial groups linked by trading relationships as well as cross shareholding of debt and equity. Board of directors composed almost solely of insiders and comparatively low in some corporations, even non-existent level of input of outside shareholders caused and exacerbated by complicated procedures for exercising shareholders' votes. Equity financing is important for Japanese corporations. However, insiders and their affiliates are major shareholders in the modern Japanese corporations. Consequently, they play a major role in the individual corporations and in the system as a whole. Conversely, the interests of outside shareholders are marginal. The German model. The German model governs the German and Austrian corporations. Some elements of this model also apply in Netherlands and Scandinavia. Furthermore, some corporations in France and Belgium have recently introduced some elements of the German model. The German model corporate governance differs significantly from both the Anglo-US and the Japanese model, although some of its elements resemble the Japanese model. Banks hold long-term stake in German corporations, and as in Japan, bank representatives are elected to German boards. However, this representation is constant, unlike the situation in Japan, where the bank representatives were elected to the corporate board only in times of financial distress. The German model differs from the other two models. First, the German corporations have two-tier board structure consisting of a management board composed entirely of insiders, that is executives of the corporation, and a supervisory board composed of labor, employee representative, and shareholder representative. Secondly, the size of the supervisory board is set by law and cannot be changed by shareholders. Third, in Germany and other countries following the model, voting right restrictions are legal. These limit a shareholder to voting a certain percentage of the corporation's total share capital regardless of shares own position. Corporate governance controls. This figure indicates that corporate governance controls are of two types: internal corporate governance control and external corporate governance control. Internal corporate governance controls. These are the control mechanisms within the organization that monitor activities that take corrective action, abolish the corporation's goals. Some of the examples of the internal control mechanisms are: first is monitoring by board of directors. The board of directors are the top personnel in the organization that have the main responsibility of safeguarding the invested capital. The executive and the non-executive directors both examine the business processes continuously so as to ensure effective governance within the organization. The kind of board structure varies from firm to firm. The board of directors also keep an eye on the functions of the executives. Executive board executive directors have access to superior knowledge of decision making processes and therefore evaluate top management based on insights from such information. Internal control mechanisms. Internal control procedures are the steps undertaken by an entity's board of directors, audit committee, management, and other personnel to assure that the entity is conforming to all the rules and regulations related to adequate disclosure through appropriate financial statements and other statements related to disclosure, operating efficiency, and conformation to different appropriate laws and regulations. Internal auditors are the employees in the organization that test the implementation aspect of the organization's internal control systems. Mechanism of separation of power. In order to ensure proper functioning in the organization, one of the internal corporate governance control measures is the separation of power. There should be separation of power in such a manner that there exists a system of checks and balances. This application of separation of power should ensure separate work for separate division and there exists a system of check and balance on each other's actions. There may be a group that proposes company-wide administrative changes. Some other group may review and can veto the changes, and one another group may check the interests of the people of larger population are being met. Performance-based compensation. Nowadays, a major chunk of the compensation structure of employees in the organization is based on their performance. It may be in the form of cash or non-cash payment, such as employee stock option schemes. However, such compensation structure may induce the managers to act taking into consideration the short-term performance. It may encourage the managers to have a myopic view about the goals of the organization. Monitoring by majority shareholders by banks, large creditors. The proportion of investment of a major shareholder is very large in the organization. Therefore, they may have the power to monitor and control the functioning of the government. This will help in reducing the urgency problem between the owners and managers of an organization. External corporate governance controls. External corporate governance control mechanisms include the control measures adopted by external shareholders such as competitors of the business, lenders of the business, government regulation, labor market controls, analysts. Now, dear students, let us try to summarize what we have learned from this particular module. We have come to know that corporate governance is one of the buzzword these days. It is one of the very important area of business environment and management which is talked about. It primarily tells us that how the corporations can be directed and controlled throughout the world through various types of systems which are prevalent in the different countries. Different types of models have come up which has led to the development of the corporate governance models, and these different models, theories, and the various principles, they have come up with thin lines of explanations with regard to the management of the corporations in the present day world, which tries to bridge the gap between the various stakeholders of the business. Thank you.